You're not going to kill anyone else, are you? Hello, my name is Will, and this is Exploding Helicopter, the podcast that always demands a proper biscuit. Now, Sir Anthony Hopkins is no one's idea of an action hero. Even in his prime, the Welsh lovey hardly exuded the flinty toughness of tough guy icons like Lee Marvin or Charles Bronson. And yet, back in the 70s, a couple of Hollywood producers bafflingly decided he was just the man to lead an explosive new spy series, one that would strip James Bond of his license to thrill. But as outing number 26 for 007 slowly cranks into gear, we're still left waiting for a sequel to the film we're reviewing here. So on this show, we're looking at the 1971 film When Eight Bells Toll. To help me out this time, I've called up one of the most distinguished members of my club. He's even on the wine committee. It's Kirkham and Movie A Days, Richard Kirkham. Welcome back, my friend.
Glad to be with you, and I'm not serving any wine, and all of the biscuits that I have cream filling.
I would expect nothing else, but I'm glad that you're here as well, because as anyone who knows you and anyone who has listened to your previous appearance on Exploding Helicopter will know, where we reviewed You Only Live Twice, you're a massive James Bond fan, and the film we're reviewing here operates in very similar territory, and it was written by one of Ian Fleming's contemporaries, or even rivals, Alistair MacLean, a hugely successful novelist. So I know you're not just a fan of the Bond films, but also of the books. But it made me wonder: have you actually read any Alistair MacLean novels?
I can't remember reading any of them. I may have read I Stationed Zebra when I was a kid, but I couldn't give you any details on that at all because I was familiar with the movie. And I think I might have followed up by reading either a novelization or the novel itself. I don't remember, but that was back in 1967.
Well, I know, though, you might not be familiar with the novels, but I know that you are, familiar with some of the movie adaptations of Alistair MacLean's novels. I mean, he's somebody who's been adapted for the screen many, many times. In fact, I think there are 17 films with a Alistair MacLean story credit. Most famously, things like The Guns That Never Roam and Where Eagles Dare, two all-time classics. But I've got a potentially controversial thesis to put to you, Richard, and it's that I think Alistair MacLean may be one of the worst adapted authors ever. I mean, I'm not familiar with all 17 films that have been made of his, but I've seen a fair few of them, and for me, a lot of them aren't very good. So I was intrigued to find out what your opinion was of these screen Alistair MacLean adaptations.
Well, of the 17, I think I've seen 7 or 8, and I probably have seen the top rung of those 7 or 8. They do suffer a little bit from being 60s and early 70s style films, so they do have some of the clunkiness of exposition and dialogue that you get in those days, although I think that they worked really well in that time period. But I know that like you said, there were 17 of them, and there are several of them that I have not seen. I think I saw the most successful ones.
So which of his do you like then? Which ones do you consider successful?
Well, I enjoyed I Stationed Zebra because it's a spy film set in the Arctic, and you've got submarines and Russian jets confronting one another. Just the scenario enough is cool, and the way the production design worked, I think they spent a lot of money on that. I also like The Guns of Navarone. It's an early 60s men on a mission kind of film, and it has Gregory Peck and Anthony Quinn in it, and when I was a kid, those were movie stars, so that drew my attention there. Where Eagles Dare has Clint Eastwood. I'm a big Clint Eastwood fan, and he's there with Richard Burton, and that's a pretty good film. I know a lot of people are not fans of Force 10 from Navarone, but I like it. I'm a huge Robert Shaw fan and Harrison Ford, and I think that it works well enough, and there are some clever bits in it. I have seen Puppet on a Chain, but I saw it on a bootleg DVD. The best part of that movie is the boat chase. Everything else is a little bit, I don't know what exactly is going on and why it was it filmed in Swedish? I'm not sure. It was definitely just a little bit off kilter for my taste. But like I said, it was good enough. And Heartbreak Pass is one that I've seen, and I'm a Charles Bronson fan, and it's got some actors in it, some character actors in it that I like pretty well. Uh, I think you can make an argument that Breakheart Pass is better than the quality of the production.
I mean, I would definitely agree. I mean, the classics are very obvious, like Where Eagles Dare, The Guns of Navarone. As I said, I also think Force 10 from Navarone is very good. Not in the same league as those other two, but that's very, very high quality. But I mean, I'm a bit cooler on some of the other films that you've mentioned. I know Ice Station Zebra definitely has its fans, and Howard Hughes most famously amongst them. But I find that film very stodgy, and I mean, you enjoy the set design. I find the set design just a little bit too much of a problem. But you know, you pays your money, you takes your choice. But there's some real. I don't know. Have you seen Bear Island?
I have not. I just found it on online, and it's like the next thing I'm going to watch because
It's got an incredible
I,
cast.
it's got a great cast, and I remember seeing the poster when I was a kid at the movie theater and thinking, well, that should be fun. And I never caught up with it, and I don't understand why. And since we've got Donald Sutherland on our minds the last week or so, it just seemed like that should be a film that I should have in my back pocket.
Well, there is one of his adaptations which might appear to you to be Drek, and I'm not casting no aspersions as to your critical eye, but it doesn't initially scream. Great pedigree. It's there's a 90s made for TV movie called Death Train, which is actually quite a lot of fun, and it features Pierce Brosnan as in a kind of proto James Bond role. This is just before he made GoldenEye, so basically he plays rather preposterously a spy who works for the United Nations, kind of doing missions of daring do. And it's actually quite a decent action adventure movie. That one, as I say, doesn't necessarily look like it's got a lot of pedigree, but I would actually say it's a decent watch. This is made in the era when TV movies often had pretty healthy budgets and were actually had still an element of prestige about them, certainly in terms of TV schedules anyway.
Well, I'm going to put that on my list. I'm sure it's available on Tubi or one of those other streaming sites.
Okay, well, I think it's time to get stuck into When Eight Bells Toll. So let's see if Trailer Man can give us a handy recap of Alistair MacLean's film career.
Remember the Guns of Navarone, Ice Station Zebra, Where Eagles Dare. Now, the screen's greatest high adventurer, Alistair MacLean, turns to the high seas, and the hunt is on. This time, it's for gold.
8 million quid's worth of gold bullion. Surely that's worth a risk or two, isn't it?
The man taking the risks, dodging the punches, and making the clinches. Anthony Hopkins. And this is Uncle Arthur, who risks other people's necks.
You'd better be very gentle with me.
I will. I'll even take my boots off.
Charlotte's idea of yachting is an expensive floating wardrobe permanently moored to a quay.
The husband's name is Skouras, Sir Anthony Skouras.
Sir Anthony is one of the most distinguished members of my own club. He's on the wine committee.
The characters, larger than life. The setting, wider than the ocean.
Look at this place. It's called Belnan Uach. What? It means the mouth of the Grey.
The danger, deeper than the sea bed.
When a series of ships carrying millions of pounds worth of gold bullion goes missing, Philip Calvert, a maverick naval intelligence officer, is ordered to investigate. Our nautical hero's search takes him to the remote coastline of the Scottish Isles. Once there, he comes across a wealthy shipping magnate, Sir Anthony Skouras, who, not at all suspiciously, has decided to moor his luxury yacht among the pissing rain and howling winds of the Inner Hebrides, instead of, say, Monaco. With a target in his sights, Calvert sets about the task of stolen treasure hunting, Can he find the missing loot? Is Skouras really the mischievous mastermind behind the mystery? And what might actually happen when 8 bells toll? Alongside Anthony Hopkins, we have the pug-faced British screen legend Jack Hawkins, plummy-voiced British screen legend Robert Morley, and French eye candy Nathalie Delon. The film was directed by Etienne Perrier and was written by Alistair MacLean, who was adapting his own novel. By all accounts, the film made a healthy profit, but it wasn't terribly well received by critics. In terms of its regard today, When 8 Bells Toll has a user rating of exactly 6 on IMDb and a user rating of 3.1 on Letterboxd. So, with all of that out of the way, Richard, what did you make of When 8 Bells Toll?
Well, I know that it's an attempt to plug in a new character that's going to be a James Bond sort of character, but they did it without the stylishness of the Bond films. It's a little bit more mechanical in its nature, but I found it entertaining. I could follow it for the most part. It was a little confusing in the opening section, although there's a great shot at the opening of Anthony Hopkins, or at least his stunt double, climbing an anchor chain onto a boat. I kind of like that. And like I said, it's not as extravagant, but you can see the way that they were trying to create characters that would mirror what was in the James Bond franchise. Robert Morley's Uncle Arthur, as he gets dubbed, is a stand-in for M, and their office is basically the same as M's office. They may very well have used the same set. I'm not sure, but it looked almost entirely, laid out in the same manner. The smart-ass comments from Anthony Hopkins' character Calvert are dead-on impressions of Sean Connery's James Bond insouciance. He's just casually tossing off bon mots and snide asides and trying to show that he's superior to everybody else, or that he doesn't care, or he has no respect for authority. And the relationship between Uncle Arthur, as he's dubbed, and Calvert is a slightly exaggerated, more comic version of the one between M and 007. So you can easily see the trail that is being blazed here. I think it's a little bit odd that we get a partner that is so clearly going to be a sacrificial lamb later on in the story, and he's potentially an interesting secondary character.
But because I found his parts in the film quite a lot of fun, so I was
yeah.
I felt if they were developing a series, actually he would have been a nice character actually to sort of keep around as a
agree.
Sort of foil for Hopkins.
And they have a few action scenes in the movie that are kind of fun. It does sometimes feel like they just have decided we need to have an action beat here, so they put something in that doesn't necessarily work all that well. But it was fine. I do think that there is a satisfying shootout at the end, although it doesn't really make a lot of sense that they would do it the way it happens. But it was. Look, when you get a chance to use a harpoon gun on the villain, always take it. And Clint Eastwood did it later in Deadpool. I'm perfectly satisfied that he cribbed it from this particular movie. I'm sure that that's the case.
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar, fittingly, similar boat to yourself in terms of my regard for this film. I actually think that I've this viewing actually I've warmed up to it. I think a bit more than I did before, and I completely agree with you about the overt Bond stylings of the film. I mean, you described many of them, but I mean, even in terms of the construction of the character Calvert, I mean, obviously James Bond is a former Navy commander. I mean, and that is exactly what Calvert is in this film. I mean, there's no very little pretense of trying to make a little difference between sort of the hero that they are presenting here and James Bond himself. And as I say, I warmed up to this film, and I think it was actually the dialogue in this film that on this viewing that I actually started having a bit more of an appreciation for. I mean, I don't think there are any like all-time zingers that I think that you would be quoting in a way which I think some of Sean Connery's or Roger Moore's most famous lines have taken on a life of their own outside of those films. But there are a lot of like nice lines of dialogue that within this film that like keep you sort of engaged with the characters, engaged with the story, and I've definitely sort of appreciated that quality of it. I do think though, you mentioned some confusion in this film. I mean, I don't know whether it's my attention span or the story, but I did find myself a bit confused at various points in this film. I don't know. Yeah, are you putting blame on me for that, or do you think it is?
No. The opening turns out to be a flash forward, and he discovers two characters who are dead. And then we're put into a sequence where he actually meets the two characters, and it turns out that they are supposed to be his allies or compatriots on this mission. And we don't know why he's on that boat, except that I guess he's following them. But like I said, they're dead before the movie starts, and then the story starts, and then we meet them, and then we kind of go back to that sequence. So I thought that organization of that chronology there was completely confusing.
It made me wonder, like, do you think? Because I wondered, do you think that was something that might have been just done in the edit, in the sense of they shot something and they thought, you know what, we need to come up with a way to get into the action quicker, and so they sort of chopped it around, or do you think it was always constructed that way? I mean, you don't know the answer.
I don't know the answer. My best guess is that was an editor's choice, that they, filmed the sequences. They started putting it together, and they said, we need something that's going to be catchy. I mean, they don't have a pre-title sequence like a Bond film does, so they need something that's going to get us engaged right away and kind of tune us into it. And I think that's their attempt to do that. But I don't think they did it as a separate set piece. I think they did it, taking what they had and said, let's put it in here and we'll make it work as kind of a pre-title or title sequence.
Well, we're talking about Bond here, and obviously we've got Anthony Hopkins being cast as this, aspiring new heir to 007's License to Thrill. As I sort of mentioned in my intro, he's not someone you associate with the action genre, certainly not in the lead role. I mean, he's turned up in supporting roles more recently in action films. But here he is, an action lead. How do you think he acquitted himself?
Well, I think he does the stuff where he is the spy analyzing what's going on, or confronting the villains, or talking out things with his boss. All of those things are fine. The action sequences where he's engaged in a fight, not great. That sequence in the graveyard we mentioned already is a little bit awkward. It looks like everybody is taking it at half speed, and I'm not even sure what the whole point of that was. And I do not want to disparage Anthony Hopkins at all, but there is nothing that screams sexy charisma about him. He is not somebody that women are going to be pining over and imagining as their partner, and men are not going to say, "Yeah, I want to be that guy."
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of the idea of him romancing Natalie Delon, or Natalie Delon's character, sort of falling in love with it. Well, I mean, her motivations are perhaps more cynical, but that whole the sort of the love angle with Natalie Delon is a complete bust. Really, it just doesn't. I don't think it's helped by Natalie Delon in this film. I think she's she comes across as not just sort of cool or icy cool. She comes across as like a freezing block of ice, and that doesn't help. And certainly doesn't help when Anthony Hopkins himself doesn't sort of, as I say, exude, as you were saying, doesn't exude, sexual magnetism in the slightest. So that then sort of just becomes a very strange relationship within the film. I don't think it's also. I mean, in fairness to Natalie Delon, I think she's dubbed, and that probably doesn't help her performance, because what's the intonation and the lines are not necessarily her own. But
that would not surprise me at all.
I mean,
Especially since Jack Hawkins is also dubbed, and I spent half the film thinking it was Charles Gray, and it turns out it was Charles Gray. It was just his voice, not his presence on the screen.
the ambition here was to create a rival to the James Bond franchise. I mean, it's much. The story here is much grittier. It's much more grounded take on the spy thriller. Now, why do you think this film, I guess, failed to turn itself, into a franchise? I mean, obviously, ultimately it's going to be commercial reasons because nobody thought they could make, it was worth the risk of putting more money into it. But yeah, I guess more in terms of what the product we see here. Why do you think that this film kind of ultimately, didn't have the legs to command a franchise? Do you think maybe you just think it was unfortunate? I mean, sometimes great films slip between the cracks, but yeah.
Well, I think it did slip between the cracks a little bit, but one of the reasons that it did so is because it doesn't have a compelling villain. You barely know who the villain is. It turns out that Lord Sorkos or whatever his title is not really the villain in the piece. He is basically a hostage in the whole process. And so who is the villain, the main antagonist? Well, we don't really know. It's the guy that Natalie's character is married to, and I don't think we even get a name for him at any given point. And it's just incredibly vague. We don't have a compelling set of characters on the other side. We just have henchmen who are appearing and then disappearing and appearing and disappearing. And you never get the sense that there's a personal stake that Calvert has in any of this. He's just kind of going through the motions. And, I suppose he's trying to mirror that James Bond cavalier attitude, but he's so cavalier that you don't really give a darn about what's going on. So without a compelling, charismatic central figure, and without some sort of villain that people can say, oh, that's something that's dynamic, that's something that's important that I care about, it's just kind of blah. And blah is not going to create a film series.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you about the very end of this film, and because I find it a really baffling moment, which is when Anthony Hopkins basically allows Nathalie Delon to sort of sail off into the darkening skies of the Outer Hebrides. I hope there's no howling wind coming in. It's certainly not a sunset she's sailing off into there. With one of the bars of gold bullion, and I watched this film twice now. I don't understand why he does that.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense, especially since look, they have the love affair thing that's going on, but he was suspicious of her the whole time. You get the impression that he is trying to be like a Bond type. Look, Bond was happy to sleep with the enemy all the time, so why wouldn't they do that in this particular film? But that didn't mean that Bond was going to turn around and say, Fiona Volpe, here, take this bag of gold with you, and I'll catch you in the next show.
Yeah, a peculiar decision. I don't think we're ever going to learn the answer. Okay, I think it's time to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be looking at the exploding helicopter action.
He is playing with fire.
It's a pretty good looking woman you hooked up with.
It's you and me now.
He is using the girlfriend of a cop
You're not even supposed to know about this.
Your girlfriend is under police surveillance.
to catch a killer.
The owner of the apartment is a guy named Carlos Hernandez. It's about nailing a cop killer. And if Eddie's on the inside, that just brings us closer.
But when the game is deception,
I'm only telling you so you won't get hurt.
Rachel's not involved.
But why are you protecting her? You're a cop. Can't you see she's pulling your chain?
someone is hiding the truth.
The cops investigating Carlos think you're involved.
Don't patronize me. What do you really think?
And when you play with fire,
I want you to help me set him up.
Men like me
someone is going to get burned. Michael Ironside, star of Total Recall. Deadly Surveillance.
We're back, and now we're looking at the exploding helicopter action. In an effort to find the gold, Hopkins conducts an aerial search in a Westland Widgeon helicopter. As he surveys the coastline, he runs into a posse of heavily armed villains who open fire on the Whirlybird with machine guns. The gunfire-damaged helicopter spirals downwards, especially as the pilot has now been crocked by the bullets. It crashes onto the rocks next to the shoreline. The tail, or the rear section of the helicopter explodes, but the cockpit remains intact. As the flames start to consume the fuselage, Hopkins finds himself trapped inside the crocked copter. The jeopardy increases when the wrecked Whirlybird slips into the rocks and plunges into the sea, threatening to drown our hero. As the cockpit fills with water, Sir Tony is finally able to free himself and swim to safety. Richard, what did you make of the exploding helicopter action?
Well, I thought that the exploding helicopter was pretty well done. Obviously they do a model at the end of the sequence because it's slowly tips off into the ocean there, and it looks good. I do think that it's strange. If you did a whole separate series, it would probably be a lot shorter if you called it Sinking Helicopter, because most of the action on the helicopter scene here takes place as the helicopter is floating to the bottom of the sea here, and I think that's a little bit more intriguing. I do think that the helicopter goes down basically because of the pilot being shot. I don't even know that they make any indication that the helicopter was damaged by the gunshots. I think it's almost entirely because it's out of control. There's one scene that is clipped in there. Maybe it's just supposed to be an interesting shot, but it looked to me like the helicopter was upside down as it was falling. And there's an interior shot of Calvert, Anthony Hopkins' character, who appears to be upside down inside the helicopter. And then suddenly it's not that way anymore. So I'm not exactly sure that there was damage to the helicopter. It's just out of control, and it hits the edge of the sea and explodes on the rock and falls in. I thought it looked pretty good. I'm good with the explosion occurring because it hit the ground. I do like the fact that the whole thing didn't go up. The cockpit kind of falls into the sea, and that explains how Calvert is able to survive for the second half of the film, because this happens right in the middle of the movie. This is not the climax of the film like you find in so many movies where a helicopter is going to explode. That's going to be their money shot, and they're going to have it as part of the the climax of the movie. Here it's in the middle of the movie, and I feel a little bit like the pilots of the helicopters are the red shirts from Star Trek. You just know that they're not going to make it out of a movie. So
I would agree. I sadly have to agree with you. I think the exploding helicopter part of this action sequence is it's sort of an hors d'oeuvre, isn't it, for the main course, which is the sinking copter as it plummets to the ocean bed, and we've got Anthony battling for his life as the fuselage fills up with water. I mean, I actually think overall the whole sequence overall, including all the underwater action, it's a very good sequence. I really enjoyed it. The exploding helicopter itself, it's clearly just build up to where we're going to go later with this particular sequence. So it's fine as it goes. I agree with you. The upside down shots are very jarring, and they don't make a lot of sense. I mean, if that helicopter did go upside down, it would then just plummet straight to the ground. It wouldn't sort of revolve back round, as seems to be the suggestion with the editing that we get here. I mean, one thing I do, and I don't know if I am alone in doing this. I don't know if you do it. as well, Richard. But whenever I see a sequence like this with a character who's like trapped underwater, I like to hold my breath and see if I can sort of hold my breath for as long as we're meant to believe this character is holding their breath here. And I think I was able to hold my breath for the same length of time that Anthony Hopkins was underwater here, but I don't think I could have held my breath and also physically exert myself in all the ways that he does in this sequence, where he's thrashing around inside this cockpit. He's kicking out the windows.
He does somehow find an oxygen mask.
He does, yes.
I'm not exactly sure what they're doing with that in the helicopter, because it's not really going to be going up
not to that altitude,
20,000 feet. But whatever, it was fine. I have done that occasionally. I don't do it all the time, but I have held my breath a little bit. I'm trying to remember. I watched something yesterday, the day before, and it's terrible because I can't get it out of my head immediately what it is. But people are interrogating somebody, and they shove him under the water, and they're holding him down, and I'm going, he's been down a long time. That's a long time for somebody. That's a really long time. Are you sure he's not dead? Apparently he's not dead. Okay, well, I didn't go back and run it and say, okay, let me try holding my breath for the time that was going on. But it was just this week, I think I saw it, and I can't even remember what it was. So it must not have been very good. But it was, those scenes are kind of dramatic. When I was a kid, the biggest nightmare I had came from one of the Bond films with an underwater sequence like this. That scene in Thunderball where the double-crossing pilot is stuck in his seat, can't get the seatbelt loose, and Largo cuts his air hose. That gave me nightmares. And that was like one of the traumatizing moments in a film where I thought, you're stuck under there and you can see yourself dying, and it's just like, that is so horrifying. But at least Anthony Hopkins in this case, he can take an active role in trying to save himself, and that happens in any of the movies where it's the hero who's going in the drink.
Okay, I think that just about wraps things up for this show. Richard, thank you for joining me once again. Do you want to take a moment to tell people where they can find you online?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Look, my personal site is Kirkham a Movie a Day, and I post, the slogan on my site is, if I saw it in a theater, you'll read about it here. So when I go to a film, whether it's a new film or an old film, I try to put up some kind of post. I'm also the host of the Lambcast, which is the official podcast of the Large Association of Movie Bloggers, which Will is a member of and has been on the show many times. And we have a weekly podcast that we post covering all kinds of movie subjects, new films, but also special projects, talking look-backs at franchises. And we have, drafts and featured movie of the month, that kind of thing. So anybody who's interested in the Lamb should check out the Lambcast, and it's available to you online. We have a YouTube video now that is included with it, so I think you'll find it's easy to locate.
Excellent. As always, don't forget to check out the Exploding Helicopter website at explodinghelicopter.com for more information and reviews about films where helicopters explode. If you can help spread the word about what we do, I'd be immensely grateful. We'll be back soon, but until then, what should people do, Richard?
They should keep watching the sky for exploding helicopters.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.